Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar, a webinar sponsored by Universal Peace Federation and its associate program, the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. Today, we're going to be talking about information and disinformation on the Korean Peninsula, and we have a very good lineup for you today. It's my pleasure at this time to introduce our moderator, the Honorable John Doolittle, who is chairman of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace in North America. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 91 to 2009, and during that time served as deputy whip and was a member of Appropriations Committee and a number of other key posts, and currently heads a government relations firm in the Washington, D.C. area. And he's a key advisor of this series of webinars, and it's a series that's going to be ongoing pretty much every Tuesday for at least the rest of this year and maybe beyond. Anyway, welcome. We're very happy to have you here. Congressman Doolittle, thank you very much for serving as moderator, and I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Larry, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We have a distinguished panel with us today on the topic of information and disinformation on the Korean Peninsula. Our first guest is Mr. Bill Gertz, national security columnist for the Washington Times, author of 8 books, 4 of which were national bestsellers, the most recent one being I War, War and Peace in the Information Age in 2017, and Deceiving the Sky, Inside Communist China's Drive for Global Supremacy in 2019. Mr. Gertz is a guest lecturer at the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Defense University, Fort McNair, Washington, D.C., and the Brookings Institution, also in Washington, D.C., and also Mr. Gertz has worked with the Hoover Institution on the campus of Stanford University. So he'll be our first guest. And I might just mention our target is to conclude in 1 hour. And Bill, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. Since I'm the opening speaker, I'd like to start with a little bit of background. I'm going to make very brief remarks, but I'd like to sum up the situation today on the Korean Peninsula as it relates to the United States U.S. policy. I think that in the emergence over the past 2 or 3 years of new long-range North Korean nuclear-armed missiles is one of the most significant national security threats facing the United States. This development came about as a result of covert programs undertaken by the North Korean regime of Kim Jongun. They have included the importation of Chinese lumber haulers that were then converted into long-range mobile missile platforms. This has been an amazing evolution as I've watched it over the years. This has been carried out despite the best efforts of the United States and other nations in the region to try to mitigate the threat from North Korea. First, through something called the Agreed Framework back in 1994. This was hailed as a great breakthrough and that would end the North Korean nuclear program. Instead, what happened, North Korea basically cheated on the accord, used the access to nuclear technology to build nuclear weapons, and then proceeded to abandon the agreed framework. That led then to the 6-party talks, which was another failure. It involved bringing in China and Russia, Japan, South Korea, and the United States into 6-way talks with North Korea. These two managed to fail. That brought us to 2017 with the Trump administration, which launched a brand new effort on North Korea. And the Trump strategy was very successful in doing 2 key things. The first thing that happened was the president, by launching 2 summit meetings with Kim Jong-un, he basically pushed aside the Chinese and also ended the six-party talks. The Chinese were not interested. They're an adversary state. They look at the United States as their main enemy, and including them in any kind of a negotiation with North Korea was totally counterproductive. The second thing that happened under the Trump administration was a program of massive maximum pressure, so-called. And this was basically an effort to impose sanctions on North Korea with the clear objective of forcing North Korea to abandon its nuclear and missile programs that directly threaten the United States. So that's kind of where we are in this effort. We don't know what the Biden administration is going to do. My guess is that they're going to go back to sort of some feckless talks, and we'll see if they maintain the sanctions. But the bottom line is, right now, with the maximum pressure, the message to the Kim Jong-un regime is either you give up these nuclear weapons or your regime is going to perish eventually. And I support that. I think it's a very good strategy. We're dealing with a very tough enemy in North Korea. This is a regime that is a truly modern totalitarian state. And I think the most important strategic message that was sent to the Kim Jong-un regime took place just about a little over a year ago in January of 2020. And that's when the United States carried out the targeted drone assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the leader of the Iranian Quds Force and a top global terrorist. This was the most significant message in terms of the pressure campaign. And what that message is that unless Kim Jong-un comes around and agrees to give up these nuclear arms, that could be his fate someday. So in the meantime, what do? I've advocated in my book, I War, a program of information warfare against North Korea. And the way to do this is to target the elites within North Korea, trying to focus on reaching the masses, as some human rights organizations have done by sending balloons across the border with messages or with flash drives. I think that is not going to be a productive way to go. What really needs to happen is that the West and the United States, together with South Korea, needs to launch a strategic information warfare program. We can't say directly that this would be leading to regime change. This campaign can be carried out under the simple notion that America is threatened by North Korean missiles, and we need to do everything possible to mitigate that threat, to end the danger posed by those long-range missiles with nuclear warheads that can reach American cities. So as part of the maximum pressure campaign, I would back off the restrictions on the sale and importation into North Korea of information infrastructure. Let's try to get the country wired up. Let's find a way to get that information in there. Even though there are now approximately 6 million mobile phones in North Korea. They're heavily restricted, but this is a start. This is a beginning point for getting information into that country. And we can target the elites. That would be people involved in the diplomatic, the political, the military, the intelligence realm. And to get these people, the message to these people, look, your country is a basket case and it's going down the tubes unless you go along with giving up these nuclear weapons. As for disinformation, I think that the most, and I outlined this in my book, I War, and I'll sum up on this note. We saw the case of North Korean disinformation in 2014 with the now famous or notorious Sony hack into Sony Pictures Entertainment. And I outlined this in minute detail. This was a really strategically effective North Korean influence and disinformation operation. They hacked into Sony computers, all of this with one goal in mind, and that was to derail the publication of the movie, The Interview, which again showed in the end blowing up Kim Jong-un. It was a comedy, but it was a very effective tool. the North Koreans demonstrated very unique cyber capabilities in getting into the Sony Pictures computer systems, stealing their information, and then using that information to threaten, including threats against movie theaters in the United States, terrorist attacks on movie theaters if that movie was shown. The movie eventually went out. I remember the day that it came out, we watched it on television, and I feel like it was a victory for the West to not have to fall into that category. And with that, I'll stop and let the next speaker go ahead.
Thank you very much. I've been asked to announce that there's a Facebook live streaming link that's been posted on the chat function in Zoom here. It's www.facebook.com/UPFamerica/videos/ a long number to enter. But I think if you do the first part, you'll be able to get in. And also just to ask everyone, please enter your questions into the chat box. Questions will follow the presentations of our speakers. Our next speaker is Mr. Yanhoe Kim. He's an associate research professor of practice and the associate director of the George Washington University's Institute for Korean Studies. He specializes in North Korea's mobile telecommunications and U.S. policy toward North Korea. Among the books he's written are North Korean Phone Money, Airtime Transfers as a Precursor to a Mobile Payment System, North Korea's Mobile Telecommunications and Private Transportation Services in the Kim Jongun era. His research findings have been covered by various media outlets, including the Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, and other media outlets worldwide. Mr. Kim, welcome. The time is yours.
Thank you, Congressman Doolittle. It's my great honor to be on this panel with this distinguished speakers. Let me focus on cell phones in North Korea and discuss how the mobile telecom changed the people's lives and the way they communicate each other in the country. So the North Korean mobile telecommunications market has seen dramatic subscriber growth since late 2008, when they started the 3G service. They're still on 3G now. And it is estimated at around 6 million, meaning around 2 out of every 10 North Koreans are using cell phones, which is amazing in a country like North Korea. Cell phones have become so popular in North Korea that now a young man without a cell phone cannot even find a girlfriend, seriously. And even those without significant income are selling their assets or hard-earned crops to buy handsets to show off their own wealth, if you will, or for their children who want to bond with their cell phone using friends. And parents will understand what I mean by this. So cell phones have become status symbols, signs of prosperity, and one of the most noticeable examples of conspicuous consumption in North Korea. It may sound ironic that the North Korean government has decided to allow the general population to access mobile telecom services when the authoritarian regime heavily depends on surveillance of its people to control information flow. However, the matter of fact is that there are no signs that the regime introduced cell phones as a means of reforming or opening up to the outside world. Rather, cell phones are seen as expressions of the regime's confidence in its ability to control the society, as opposed to a sign of capitulation to market forces. So the regime managed the pace and scale of mobile telecom services in a very careful and measured way. So North Koreans are denied internet access, international calls are blocked, calls and text messages, if not all, are monitored by the security agencies. And the newly installed watermarking system rejects any outside apps or media without a government signature of approval. Even with the strict constraints that I just described, cell phone has already become a lifeline for the merchants in the informal markets. Already in the 1990s, during the famine, cross-border smugglers who used illegal Chinese cell phones knew that the market information was the determining factor of their business success. In such circumstances, the construction of a North Korean cell phone network meant a great opening of nationwide business opportunity for merchants, facilitating timely communication of market trend information. And this allowed the merchants to determine quantities and prices of products to trade, as well as shipping and delivery methods over the phone. The merchants can no longer compete in the markets without a cell phone, as young men cannot make girlfriends without a cell phone. And since Kim Jongun came to power in late 2011, whether the government intended or not, North Koreans are fully utilizing the new mobile technology by combining it with spontaneously formed private ground transportation services. And this has led to rapid changes to the extent that they may be called the logistics revolution, if not Jasmine revolution. So for example, North Korean style parcel delivery services are actively going on now, not exactly the same as FedEx or UPS services in this country, but good enough for the North Korean standard. There are truck or bus drivers who provide courier service, and for the merchants, all they need is the shipper, recipient, and driver's cell phone numbers. As a result, long gone is the term runner merchant, who used to travel long distance to make profitable trade, as connecting through a phone call has opened up a new business era of so-called stay-at-home merchants. This is kind of a revolutionary change for the North Korean merchants. Assisted by the rapid exchange of information, the informal market system is evolving to create close ties between private transportation service providers, wholesale and retail merchants, brokers, fuel traders, usually smugglers, checkpoints, and other associated actors along the supply chain, and bringing in new customers, pricing freight charges, transferring settlement costs in cash, trading or smuggling gas, and tense situations at checkpoints are all being managed efficiently through communication on cell phones. And thanks to these changes, North Koreans have also come to increasingly rely on cell phone communications for financial transactions. When they want to make long-distance payments or money transfers, they use private networks of wealthy merchants, 돈주 in Korean, meaning money masters. They function as private local bank branches. Like the hawala transactions popular in the Middle East or North Africa, the money transfers do not take place in cash, but instead are based on communications between members of a network of 돈주, basically their cell phones. And receipt of payments is confirmed between senders and recipients by cell phone calls, and 돈주 have their own clearing system. So all in all, market information and money are rapidly moving around on cell phones in North Korea. More and more people and products are also moving around between the marketplaces off the regime's radar. That means mobile telecom would be a core element in determining the changing direction of marketization in North Korea. And I think we have to pay attention to how these changes will ultimately impact North Korean society in the future, especially in terms of planting seeds of a civil society there. So let me stop here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. We are getting a few questions coming into the chat box. Just a reminder that please post your questions there. And with that, we'll go to our next speaker, my colleague in the House when we were both there, the Honorable Dan Burton. I pushed the wrong thing here. Mr. Burton had a long and distinguished career in the House of Representatives for 30 years. And during this time, he served as chairman of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee And in the area of foreign affairs, he was a member virtually his entire time in Congress of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He served as either chairman or ranking member of the subcommittees on Asia and Pacific, Middle East, Europe and Eurasia, Africa and Western Hemisphere. He presently serves as co-chairman of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Peace. Congressman Burton, the time is yours.
Thank you, my good buddy. Good seeing you. Let me start off by saying Bill Gertz and Mr. Kim did an outstanding job in covering most of the bases that need to be discussed today. But one thing that I'd like to talk about is consistency in our foreign policy. Every time we get a new president, it seems our foreign policy changes, sometimes not a great deal, and other times radically. And I think that's one of the big problems we have is that our adversaries, in particular, China and North Korea and Russia, they have a consistency of foreign policy. And as a result, it many times puts us in an inferior position. One of the things that I'm concerned about right now is President Trump, who just left office, was very strong and made some very strong changes in our foreign policy, in particular with North Korea. And as a result, I think he had quite a bit of success. One of the concerns I have right now is the new president, President Biden, has had in the past different attitudes toward foreign policy. In Iran, for instance, the Obama-Biden administration had a much different policy than President Trump had. And we believe now that they'll probably go back to the policy they had, which many of us believe will not bear the kind of fruit that we should. We think that the nuclear expansion programs that they have will continue. And, although they say that we're going to be able to monitor those things, unless we get inspectors in there to see for sure that these nuclear facilities aren't producing additional weapons, then I think we're going to have a problem. And the same thing's true with North Korea. Kim Jongun and his father, Kim Jong-il, have in many cases said that they were going to do things and then they didn't. Kim Jong-il, when he was the dictator up there, made some agreements with, I believe it was President Clinton, and we were to understand that there was going to not be any additional nuclear development, that they were going to start disarming their nuclear arsenal. That was promised. We gave them resources and energy, organizations to work with them. And after we did that and spent billions of dollars, they turned right around and continued on with their nuclear program. Now, President Trump, he came in and he was going to make sure that they stuck by their goals and their commitments. And he started putting sanctions on them. And with the economy that they have in North Korea and the problems that Kim Jong-il has to face, I think that that was one of the reasons that President Trump was able to have a negotiation understanding with Kim Jong-il. And things seem to be heading in the right direction. My big concern now is that we may end up with a more liberal foreign policy, in particular towards China, towards Russia, and toward North Korea. And I think that would be very unfortunate. If there's one thing that bullies in the schoolyard or in the world theater understand, it's strength and knowing that we have resolve. And what I said earlier was that our foreign policy in many cases has been inconsistent, up and down and up and down. And that's one of the things I don't think we can afford right now with the expansion of the nuclear arsenals that our adversaries have. So I guess I'm going to cut this short because Bill and Mr. Kim covered so much ground that I don't want to be redundant. But I will say this: those of us who are concerned about the nuclear development programs that our adversaries have need to be resolute of purpose. And one of the organizations we have, the National Association of Parliamentarians for Peace, we have right now, I think, 5,700 members, yeah, and we have over 100 and some countries that are involved. And I hope that we will be able to pass resolutions and contact these countries that are developing additional nuclear weapons to let them know that the world in general, not just one specific country like the United States, the world in general is for a reduction of these nuclear arsenals, and we want them to stop producing them in the first place. The more they produce these weapons, the closer we come to some kind of a nuclear holocaust that could be accidentally started. That's something we can't afford. And so I just like to say in closing, I wish the best to our new president, President Biden, but I hope that he has a very strong and resolute foreign policy, in particular towards China and North Korea.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much for your excellent comments. The time is now available for questions, and we have some that have come in. So I will throw them out there. I think they're generally available for any one of you to take and comment on. Here's one. Is China happy with a 3-generation power dynasty in North Korea? Did China foresee this happening?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that one. North Korea remains somewhat independent. It boasts of having a self-reliant foreign policy and national policy, but China is the emerging hegemon in Asia and has definitely a defense alliance with North Korea. Oftentimes, China plays a deceptive game in its relations with North Korea, saying that it is going along with US and Western efforts to try to pressure the Kim Jongun regime. But there is certainly some wariness on the part of the North Korean regime about the Xi Jinping regime in China. I can remember an incident a number of years ago where there was an explosion at a train station in North Korea along the route that was being taken by the North Korean leader. And this was widely seen as a message from China that, look, we can decapitate your regime if we so choose. So therefore, you better do our bidding. You better bow down and kowtow to the hegemon. So it's a little bit unclear on what exactly the regime is doing. For a long time, Kim Jong-un was not welcome in Beijing. And then, of course, he was welcomed there around the time when President Trump launched his diplomatic initiatives with the North. In short, and just to say that the 3 generations, North Korea could not survive without China. If China so chose that it could really apply maximum pressure by cutting off oil supplies, cutting off trade, and the like. So China has a lot of leverage over North Korea that it hasn't used.
Thank you. Just in the interest of unless somebody wants to jump in with another comment, just to get to these other questions, what are the most effective ways currently being used to reach North Korean citizens with news and information? I presume that's from the outside world.
So let me take the question. So if you're talking about real-time news information, then radio broadcast is the most effective so far, because I mean, the North Korean regime, they do try to jam the radio frequencies or the broadcast from outside, including the US and also Korea and other countries if they are interested. But North Korea, they don't have enough resources to jam all the outside broadcast coming into their country. And other information, delivery, if you will, efforts by the activists, it has a time lag, and you have to go through the in-person networks. So the most effective way to deliver a real-time news is radio broadcast. As you know, the Voice of America and Radio Free Asia are doing very good job on that front.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, that we've learned from some of the defectors that along the border between North Korea and China, there have been some the ability to smuggle in cell phones. Again, it's extremely dangerous for people in North Korea to communicate outside the country. They try to control strictly all flow of information in and out. The internet is very strictly controlled. There is some internet access in Pyongyang, but again, it's very restricted. My theory is that if we can get the country wired up, the innate innovativeness of the Korean people will find ways to get information both inside the country and get information outside the country. There's also some news outlets in South Korea, NK Daily comes to mind, which has been able to cultivate human sources inside North Korea, and they often are able to get information in, and most importantly, get information about what's happening inside North Korea.
Thank you. You've mentioned, Bill, the people defecting from North Korea. This question relates to that. There seem to be many defectors from the North appearing on television in South Korea and in the US. Is there a well-known process for leaving North Korea? How does it work? And does the government more or less allow people to leave? Maybe by paying money.
Yeah, I'll answer that. Maybe Mr. Kim can also. Yeah, the defector networks have been set up, and it's a long underground railroad process. Many of them go from North Korea. They manage to get across the border, and once they're not in a free country, they're in a communist country in China. A lot of them can then try to make their way south to countries like Thailand or other places in Southeast Asia, and then eventually to South Korea. This is a very significant program. I think it should be supported even more. I know that most of them are human rights groups and NGO groups that are doing that. I've interviewed a number of these defectors and heard some really heart-wrenching stories. Just very quickly, one of them, I interviewed a soldier when I was in Seoul who was a special forces soldier in North Korea. And he tried to get both he and his wife and daughter out of the country through a friend. And at the border, they were betrayed by the friend and they ended up imprisoned. And he managed to get away by himself, but left behind his wife and daughter and was trying very hard to get those two people out of the country. And again, for doing such a thing, it's almost a death sentence. I would emphasize again that the regime in North Korea is guilty of crimes against humanity, according to a UN special investigation led by Judge Michael Kirby back in 2014. So this is really it's really important to educate people about the nature of this regime up there.
Why has the whole civilized world allowed this nightmare to continue all these decades? I mean, it's well known that this has gone on, but somehow the world has turned a blind eye to it.
I'll try to answer that. I think it's because there's been an inconsistent foreign policy, not only from the United States, but a lot of countries. And we have, in the past, rewarded people like Kim Jong-il, his father, and they took our support and made promises. And then after they did that, they violated everything they said and continued on with the programs that we're opposed to, their nuclear development program. And as long as we have a foreign policy that goes up and down and up and down, we continue to let them off the hook. If we had a consistent foreign policy that put sanctions on them, that put all kinds of restrictions on their trade and exports, I think that would really get the message across to Kim Jong-il and anybody who would subsequently be a leader after him. they have to know that there's a price to be paid when they violate their agreements. And as long as we have an inconsistent foreign policy and they think they can work us, they will do that. And there probably won't be any change because they have complete control over the population. They take care of their military, at least most of them. And as a result, the repression there is so great that you can't make any change. So we have to do it from the outside, in my opinion. And that means we have to continually put pressure on them, and it has to be consistent.
Yeah, and I would also add to that too, that clearly if there was a regime in the world that deserved to be changed and pressured out of existence, it's the North Korean regime. Unfortunately, the whole concept of regime change has been undermined over the last decade or so, most recently in Libya when the Obama administration ousted the Gaddafi regime, and now we're left with a failed state there. So I think it's important that we focus on regime change, but we can't use that. We won't be able to gather the international support needed to put the pressure on. That's why I think the Trump strategy was so good. That is basically mitigate the threat of nuclear armed missiles pointed at the United States at all costs, and make it the point that if they get rid of those missiles, then perhaps their regime might survive. But if they don't, their regime will certainly perish.
Thank you. Here's a question. Is there going to be some discussion of practical projects? For example, after a hurricane, North Korea dismissed the emergency managers. There did not seem to be any lessons learned or mitigation measures. South Korea, by contrast, could implement considerable improvements in newer emergency management, which may be useful in North Korea as suitable conditions arise.
I don't know that we have an answer to that.
Emergency management, like the flood or typhoon, you can see every year on the Korean Peninsula. Last year, one noticeable change in North Korea was they broadcast the situation in a very timely manner. Usually, when it comes to negative news, like the damages of the flood, North Korean media, they were not active. They just delivered the news in a very like several days afterwards. But last year, for some reason, they just tried to mimic Western countries' news media. Partly because many experts guess that Kim Jongun, he does know that how serious the damage the North Korean people will have to suffer on top of the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic sufferings because of the sanctions. So Kim Jong-un wants to do some kind of a propaganda game again, letting the people know that he cares what people are going through, and trying to deliver the news real time. But that's it. I mean, when it comes to emergency management, I don't think they have an effective system there. Again, a cell phone might be a good tool to enhance the efficiency, but I'm not sure North Korea is really actively investing in that kind of technology and trying to educate the people on that matter.
Well, you mentioned, Mr. Kim, the cell phones, and that's, of course, that's come up various times. Here's a question. Does the widespread use of cell phones in the North represent the genie leaving the bottle, so to speak, in terms of new freedoms being seen that can't be reversed?
So as I said, North Korea, the regime has been very careful in terms of allowing the technologies available to the people. So for example, at the early stage, people were able to send videos of pictures or audio files But in a couple of years, the regime realized that this is kind of dangerous technology, dangerous service they're providing to their own regime security. So they blocked for several years, and then they resumed the service after they figured out how to closely monitor all the files transferred on the network. So it is really hard for the people to communicate, whatever they think or whatever information they want to exchange on the network. There has to be a technology that can go pass around the network. And one of my defector interviewees said that if you are a little bit knowledgeable on how this software works and you have access to Chinese programs, then you can download or exchange your files with your cell phones. I mean, and basically your cell phone and your friends or relatives' cell phones, not through the network, but basically inserting your USB with the files from another cell phone. That's even not technically available, but again, if you have a good network where you can get this knowledge and software, then you can make it happen. But this again, I think it has been always cat and mouse game between the people and the regime. And the people, North Korean people, they jokingly say that if the government has a policy, we do have countermeasures. But after the government figure out what the countermeasures are, then they introduce a new policy. That's what's going on in North Korea, I think.
Thank you. Do you think that Kim Jong-un and the North Korean regime actually fear the United States? You or anyone?
Well, traditionally, communist countries want to take care of their regime, and the people are a secondary concern. And I think that's particularly true in North Korea and in China. I think Bill Gertz said a while ago, he was talking about the repression there. And it's legion. Father Moon, who we all know or knew, he talked extensively, and I met with him several times. He talked extensively about how they were mistreated in North Korea and that the regime didn't seem to care. And as a result, people were always trying to get out of North Korea if they could, even though they knew that if they were caught, they were going to have to pay a severe price by going into one of their gulags. So the big problem that you have, not only in North Korea, but in China or Russia, is if you appear to be rebelling against the regime, and this is a traditional communist attitude, in my opinion, they're going to come down very hard on you. And if you're a real threat, or if you appear to be a threat to them, they're going to put you away or do worse.
And apparently the United States and the rest of the world will do nothing because they have done nothing in the past, right?
Well, let me just follow up, John. That's what I was talking about earlier, the inconsistency of foreign policy. If we're going to put pressure on a communist or totalitarian regime, it has to be consistent and it has to be strong, and they have to know we're not going to let up. But if every 4 years we have a change in policy, they can say, well, we'll just wait till the next guy, and maybe we can negotiate with him differently. And they may have a history that they can look at that shows that that will happen. So the one thing I would say to any president or any leader of any country that's negotiating with a totalitarian communist government is make sure your policy is consistent, especially if you want to bring about some positive changes.
Thank you. Here's a question that Kim Jong-un talks about denuclearization. Is there any possible way he would ever get rid of the nukes, or is he just playing for time?
His father didn't do it. President Clinton gave him an awful lot, and he didn't do it. He said he was going to. Kim Jong-un said he's going to do it. And I thought President Trump was making some inroads there. But unless we have people who go in and inspect and can really see that they're dismantling and not creating additional ICBMs or short range missiles, then they're going to do it, in my opinion. So we have to have a strong policy and be able to go in and actually observe what's going on.
Yeah, I'd note too that, yeah, nuclear weapons for the North Korean regime are the key insurance policy. Kim Jong-un saw what happened to Libya when Gaddafi in 2003 gave up his nuclear program and he ended up being dragged through the streets. That would be the case, Kim Jong-un believes. That said, the maximum pressure idea is try to impress on this regime that there's a cost benefit analysis. And if the pressure is strong enough, if the Korean elite begins starving and not just the population,
Yes.
then there has to be a calculation made. Does this regime fall? Will the pressure become so great that the regime can no longer sustain itself in power? That's a big question mark. This regime is strongly developed both military and internal security controls, all designed to keep the Kim Jong-un regime in power. Negotiations have not worked. So clearly the thing that's remaining is to have the maximum pressure to force that government to make the decision. Do you want your family regime to survive, or do you want it to perish, or do you want to have nuclear weapons? And I think it's not clear whether it will actually work, but I think that's the best option at this point.
I think I know the answer to this, but let me just ask you as a follow-up, Bill. Has such pressure ever been applied to this point? I mean, has the elite ever gone hungry in North Korea?
Well, I think the problem is we have the sanctions in place and we have compliance by many of the Western states. I think the big problem has been China and Russia. That has been where the leakage has occurred. And again, I mentioned earlier about how China could turn off the energy spigot to North Korea by the snap of its fingers. I don't know. Again, I just don't know the answer to that. But like I said, I think it's our best option now. And it's one that will garner larger and larger international support.
Let me
Yes,
add something to that. Ronald Reagan took on the Soviet Union and Mikhail Gorbachev, and he let them know that we were going to build up our military and make absolutely sure that they were going to be in an inferior position. And as a result, the economy of the entire Soviet Union, with all this little client states that they controlled, started to collapse. And as a result, the entire Soviet Union fell apart at that time, and they came up with new leadership. So pressure does work on a totalitarian regime if it's strong enough and if it's consistent enough. Now, nobody knows how long it would take or how much pressure it would take. But if we sit back and continue to work with them, there will be no reason for them to change, in my opinion. They have to know, as Bill said, that there's a price to pay for what they're doing. And if the price is high enough, they'll make changes just like Gorbachev did.
And from a strategic information point of view, I would also note too that getting information inside North Korea is key. I think we live in an information age. They're totally isolated from the world. I think getting an information infrastructure in place, whether it's internet, whether it's Bluetooth, whether it's wireless communications, getting laptop computers, getting handheld devices in there. I think all of those are key hardware tools that could be the beginning point for really getting information in and out of the country. And once that's done, the Korean people and the Korean elites can figure out what they're missing and what they're lacking.
well, Bill, do you believe that the regime would want to have those kinds of things take place?
I think they would want to have it if they thought they could control it. But like I said, you can control the internet. The Chinese have been doing that. The North Koreans are doing that. Can you control a Bluetooth signal? Can you control a wireless signal that goes from room to room, from house to house. I think there are ways to do it. They're also looking now at developing small satellites that can be launched and placed over North Korea that could provide internet access directly to handheld devices or other devices, which could then be smuggled into the country. So those are the kinds of things that I'm advocating that we do to get this, get the information in there and then begin a strategic information campaign.
So that would be without the consent of the regime. We could do that with the satellites, for example.
Yes, but then again, you'd have to get unofficial handheld devices or unofficial computers or computers that could be modified. Again, if we supplied old used laptop computers, donations by NGOs, things like that, they could be configured so that they could be rewired to circumvent regime controls.
Okay, thank you. Well, is there, this is a related question that came. Is there anything that will cause China to give up on supporting North Korea?
Well, I think, yeah, China views North Korea as a important strategic bloc to what it regards as Western influence and basically adversary influence. China regards itself as surrounded by enemies from whether it's Mongolia or India or Southeast Asia states or Japan. And so they're not interested in facilitating the reunification of North and South Korea on South Korean and United States terms. So they are definitely a problem in this. And I think that once again, the policies of the Trump administration completely reoriented American foreign policy towards China, recognized the threat, recognized the need to push back, to confront, to compete. And the initial signs and signals we're getting from the Biden administration is that we're never going back to the appeasement policies of the past. There will be some retrenchment based on the officials who've been appointed to key China positions. But I think that keeping the pressure on China is going to be a good thing, and I hope that it lasts.
Thank you. Well, you referenced that, but Biden has appointed pro-China politician Thomas Donilon and pro-North Korea Bonnie Jenkins. Jenkins is very close to women across the DMZ Korea Peace Network. His appointment is totally different from what Democratic Party officials were saying about their policy about China. What can be done in the future relationship between the U.S. and China?
Well, you know, we have a saying in Washington that people are policy. When you pick the right people, you get the right policies. Pick the wrong people, you get the wrong policies. So far, the Biden picks are a mixed bag. The Secretary of State designee, Tony Blinken, has supported the outgoing Trump administration's designation of China as engaged in genocide and crimes against humanity against the Uyghurs. This is an unprecedented step. The first time they have used the G word against China, and it's very, very significant. So the fact that they're supporting that. The White House advisor on China, the top guy is a guy named Kurt Campbell. He is a fairly centrist, somewhat realist, but again, it's not going to be the same as the Trump administration. Like I said, the Trump administration created a revolution in American policy towards China. Basically, understanding technology theft, intelligence gathering, and the like had to stop. We'll have to wait and see on the other positions that they mentioned. There are definitely pro-China elements within the Biden administration. Again, those that want to go back to the old days of appeasement and engage, unfettered engagement. The notion for the past 30 to 40 years was that if we just traded with China, if we ignored their human rights abuses, if we ignored their arms proliferation around the world, their cyber attacks, that this would have a moderating influence. It was an utter failure, and I think there's bipartisan recognition that it failed. So the next question is, what do you do now? And we'll just have to wait and see on the part of the Biden team.
Thank you. Well, here's a question that may offer a possible solution, at least for the two Koreas. is offering Kim Jong-un a Hirohito option, possible as a way of encouraging unification of North and South, with the Emperor Hirohito remained the emperor after World War II and without real powers, apparently. I'm not certain how many powers he actually had, but I know he was always a much admired figure. But he was regarded as a ceremonial figure, a head of state. Is some possible solution like that out there for getting Kim Jong-un to enjoy the advantages of South Korea without, giving up his role?
Well, when you talk about Japan, MacArthur went in there and he was the boss and he reorganized everything. And the emperor was still looked upon as a god, and they let that ride. But they took away all of his ability or the ability of the Japanese government to run the place until it was reorganized. I personally don't see that happening with Kim Jong-un. I think he is hell-bent to keep power, and he's going to do it any way he can. And to have somebody come in and reunify the country and put him in a subservient role like they did with Hirohito, I personally don't think that's going to happen.
Okay. Any other comment to that issue? Well, let's see, find the last question here. And before we go to Dr. Jenkins, here it is. We all agree that China doesn't want North Korea closer to the West. Seems the view of the panel is that finding ways to open telecommunications channels with North Korea would be good. The changes in the former Soviet Union started similarly with the advent of the fax machine. How to more effectively break China's hold on North Korea? I guess you did address that, Bill, actually, in your comments before. Does anybody want to elaborate on that subject of how we speed up the wiring of North Korea?
Let me add one interesting things going on in North Korea. North Korea, they actually introduced a kind of mobile money. Although it seems like a pilot project, up until summer of last year, North Korean people were allowed to transfer their call minutes on their cell phones. And among the people, it was treated as like a proxy cash. So if you have like 100-minute call minutes and want to send to your relatives, like from Pyongyang to Cheongjin as a birthday gift, you can just simply send your call minutes and the recipient would take it as a present and they can sell it to other people and get cash, or they can just use it without having to pay their cash. And they somehow moved to a mobile money system. And I think North Korea is really trying hard to leapfrog, if you will, their economy using this mobile technology. And if we want to change North Korea, the way they behave, I think the security game, if you will, is one dimension. But looking into their dynamic socio-economic changes is another dimension we have to consider very seriously and try to figure out how we can utilize these changes for our favor, in our favor. And hopefully we can get some ideas for our future negotiations with North Korea.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the panelists who've spoken. I'd like now to introduce our host, Dr. Michael Jenkins, who is chairman of the Universal Peace Federation of North America and president of the co-sponsor of this webinar, the Washington Times Foundation. He has a lot of important titles and important jobs. Chairman of the Washington Times Holdings, LLC, owners of the Washington Times. And he's former director of the Northeast Asia Peace Initiative and the Middle East Peace Initiative, which have worked since the 1980s on conflict resolution projects on the Pacific Rim and in Israel and Palestine. So, Dr. Jenkins, the time is yours.
Thank you, Congressman Doolittle, Congressman Burton, Mr. Kim, and Bill Gertz. Excellent panel discussion, and your contributions are so important. We first want to congratulate President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris on their election. And we also want to recommend to them that they keep the strong position with China and also North Korea that the Trump administration had. More has been done to be able to advance the possibility of dialogue and going forward from a strong position. A weak position will allow nuclear development to occur more rapidly. We also see America's role as absolutely central, and therefore negotiating away our position in Korea or in Northeast Asia also will not work. The understanding of the situation with North Korea is so important for the American people to see that we should engage on every front, as Bill and our other panelists were sharing. We should be very clear about communications. The more communication, the better. Absolutely, the people are hungry for knowledge and understanding, and they need it. And they need to understand also about the world. And also at the same time, the engagement with Chairman Kim is also equally important. The UPF and Congressman Burton's Parliamentarians Association has had delegations go to North Korea together with allies of North Korea who are also members of the UPF, interestingly. So we have a broad approach. They've invited our founder and another delegation to come, and we have had engagements over the years. But that direct engagement is important. The founders of UPF, the founders of the Washington Times, Dr. Moon and her husband went to North Korea, met Kim Il-sung, and that opened up a continuous relationship that has never stopped on to Kim Jong-il and on to Kim Jongun. And therefore, engagement is important. And engagement with the Korean people in the South is also critically important. That's why America needs to be strong and show its strong support. We hope the administration will take that path. We also see that this is a time of transition. Anything could happen right now. We should not think that we should just follow all the patterns of the past and go for another 40 years, because we also remember very well that there was a turning point when President Reagan was strong, in which the Soviet Union lost power and control, and finally it had to yield and it collapsed. And we believe also that if we're strong and we hold to the freedom and also pursue that, not with an idea to destroy everyone on the various sides, but also to help them transition to a free people and a developing economy. A book by Anne Fifield is very, very interesting. It's called The Great Successor. She was on one of our UPF programs, which we now have every week. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., there's a program on Korea with experts like we had today. And we want to encourage you to join those programs. And once a month will be on Thursdays, as well as every Tuesday. But we had a media program with Anne Fifield, and it was very interesting. Bill Gertz was there and Guy Taylor, and it really helped to see that things can change. This Kim Jong-un is not the same as his father or grandfather. He grew up and was educated in Switzerland, and he had exposure to the West. And there is many of the experts in Washington do believe that he does want to see economic development and prosperity, like this leapfrog to another level of economy. And I think that's why he was also open to meeting President Trump. He wanted to gain the economic favor to engage that way. But at the same time, he wasn't about to give up any nuclear weapons. So it's not a simple thing, but engagement is absolutely the way to go with strength, engagement with strength. And we're very honored to share this program with everyone today. And we'll be again on the next program will be covering the various different angles of how we can look at North Korea and learn. We're covering it also from a business angle and the business relationships with China and North Korea and South Korea. Many people don't realize that South Korea's #1 trading partner is China. So when America worked to bring THAAD into the South Korea to help protect from the missiles, China could punish South Korea severely for that. So it's not a simple matter, but I think that we cannot deal with North Korea at all without China being in the center of our discussion. And I think President Trump did a great job with that. I think he really understood that point, that unless China is brought a relationship with America through our strength and negotiated, it will continue to fully support North Korea. And it makes it impossible for the sanctions to totally work. Because what happens was they followed the sanction to not receive shipments of coal from Korea, but they actually changed their purchasing to other things, and the regime ended up with the same amount of money. So that can no longer be like that. And I want to thank everybody today, especially Congressman Burton and Congressman Doolittle, who are leading this Parliamentarians Association. Dan is doing it for the whole world with 172 countries. And Congressman Doolittle's a North American person. We would thank our audience, Mr. Kim and Bill Gertz. Always great to have you with us. And I want to thank everybody for this wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Members of our panel especially, thank you so much for your contributions. And we'll look forward to the next opportunity to discuss these issues. And with that, our program will be concluded.
Thank you.
Thank you, John, for being such a good moderator.
Thank you.